assuming nobody's talking, so we're not hearing anything.
They just voted on an amendment and it passed 90-0.
All right, so you're live. You guys can start talking, and I'll just take your cues.
Okay. Hi, welcome. My name is Jake Jacobs, and I'm an art teacher in New York City, and a member of the BAT teachers, the New York BAT. We're here trying to cover the hearings going on right now in the U.S. Senate, in the Health Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, where they're taking up the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, very controversial education law that expired in 2007, and the senators are right now just voting on the amendments that are being added to it. But I'm joined here by Paul Fix, and he's in Vermont, and Paul's going to represent the average American who is going to try to learn a little bit about what's going on here on the Senate floor. Bernie Sanders is a member of the Health Committee, but he hasn't been inactive in these hearings that I've seen over the last day or two, and they're supposed to go on until Friday, where they're going to actually vote on the whole big thing. So if you want to follow along and leave comments, feel free. Some people are tweeting this using the ESEA hashtag, and that stands for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And we're definitely open to comments as people discuss this. But it's pretty controversial in teacher circles right now, because the main elements of what they're voting on is whether or not they're going to get rid of Common Core, whether they're going to make it voluntary or mandatory for every kid in 3rd to 8th grade across the whole country, or the states that have adopted it. And the other thing is annual tests, whether tests will be mandatory, and whether the federal government, whether Obama, and whether Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, will be forcing states to test every kid every year in those grades, in math and English. So there's pretty much agreement right now on some of the major contours of the bill, and that is that they are going to get rid of Common Core so that it's voluntary and the states can opt in if they want it. As far as annual testing, right now as it stands, it's staying in, with the argument being that kids that are doing poorly, kids that are not doing well, need to be tested so that we can identify them. And it's pretty controversial because Democrats and Republicans who are taking a lot of campaign contributions from big testing companies and education lobbies seem like they want to keep that testing in place, whereas parents, teachers, students, superintendents, principals all across the country have been saying for years that the testing is doing more harm than good, and that we need to reduce the amount of tests or get rid of them altogether, because the schools should be in charge of the testing, not the federal government. So those are the really big things, but there's all kinds of amendments being stuck onto it right now. And right now, on the floor, they're voting on an amendment by Jack Reed, a senator from Rhode Island, who wanted to attach funding to librarians or libraries in schools, school libraries. So there's all these little wrinkles that each senator is proposing in amendments that are either going to make it into the bill or not, and then it'll be voted on Friday. So what do you think, Paul? Did that make any sense whatsoever, or?
Well, it makes a lot of sense, Jake, on the surface, and I know the words you're using, but as a teacher insider, these things mean things to you that they may not to the rest of us. So let's back up to the beginning. If you could kind of quickly two of the words, terms you threw out were No Child Left Behind and Common Core. If you could give us an overview of those basics so that we have an understanding, let's start with just what they are, and maybe we can get into what the controversies are about whether they keep or trash them.
Right. Okay. Well, if let's start with No Child Left Behind because that came in earlier. No Child Left Behind was a product of George W. Bush, and it was the reauthorization of the Education Act, which is, a big question. What is the role of the federal government when it comes to schools, when it comes to education? And all the way until the 60s, the federal government had absolutely no role whatsoever in education. So when Lyndon Johnson first passed the ESEA, the the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it was because a lot of states were, had really poor areas and kids weren't getting anything. They were being totally deprived. They had maybe like a one-room school building with rats and all that. So it was part of the war on poverty, and President Johnson signed this bill, which made it a little more equitable. They were saying that kids weren't getting their rights served if they weren't getting the same resources as other kids. And so then, from the 60s to all the way up to 2001, that was the main gist of it. There was also some stuff where they said students with disabilities and students with special ed should have their needs met, which is all fine and dandy. But in 2001, George Bush had this amazing new idea that we want to test every kid in school every year in math and writing, or math and literacy, and they wanted to give a lot of the contracts to private companies like Pearson and Scholastic and all these big education companies, including George Bush's brother, but that's another story. Anyway, No Child Left Behind was controversial coming in. And there was a lot of resistance to it because they were saying, well, what do we need the federal government telling every school in the land that you got to test these kids once a year in these subjects? So George Bush got it through Congress back then by getting an ally in Ted Kennedy. It was actually Senator Ted Kennedy who was the key senator that saw No Child Left Behind through. And ever since 2001, or I think it finally got enacted in 2002, what do you think about the test? And they'll all tell you the same thing. Oh my God, they're terrible. We don't get anything out of them. They're also controversial because they were changed in the last couple of years to incorporate the Common Core. And Common Core is another steaming pile of controversy that was originally started by a bunch of Republican governors who wanted to kind of pool resources and say, hey, why do we have different standards in our states? It was all agreed that they can pool their resources and just come up with common standards, and then each state can use it. And they figured that would save each state about $30 million a year at the time, as I remember. So the idea grew and grew, and by the time Obama got elected, they made Common Core pretty much the law in the land. I think every state except 2 or 3 adopted Common Core, and the way they did it was by No Child Left Behind waivers. So what you have is like a really bad law, unpopular law from George Bush and Ted Kennedy, No Child Left Behind. And it said that every school has to have proficient learning, that the kids have to be proficient on these tests. Otherwise, the school's no good and there's sanctions. And because they said every kid has to be proficient by the year 2014, Well, that was an unreachable goal. I mean, do you think it's possible, Paul, to get every single kid in a school proficient on these testing levels? No, there's always some kids, that have problems. There's kids that don't even show up to school. I mean, we have kids with disabilities, we have kids that don't speak English. You name it, there's a reason why kids are not proficient on the test. So every single state came to Obama and they said, we need a waiver because we're going to get these sanctions, we're going to get funding cuts, or we're going to have intervention plans. And Obama has been giving out these waivers ever since he's been in office. If you want your No Child Left Behind waiver, here's what you have to do. And what they wanted everybody to do was they wanted them to adopt Common Core. And there was incentives for that, there was competitions, and there was grants. And then they also wanted them to say, we want you to take teacher evaluations, and we want you to tie them to the test scores. So if a teacher is teaching a class and the kid's test scores are low, then it's going to reflect on something the teacher did. And that was new. That was the first time that was ever done when that was instituted just a couple of years ago. In fact, 2013 is when it first went into effect in New York State. So those are the two terms that we were talking about: No Child Left Behind and Common Core. And what they're debating now, because No Child Left Behind technically elapsed in 2007. So for all of Obama's presidency, they've just kept it in place, using extenders and using these waivers. But now they're actually having a debate about getting rid of No Child Left Behind and replacing it with something different. And all of the teachers across the country and all the parents groups, vast majorities are all saying the same thing. The testing does more harm than good, and we need to have local control. We need to go back to local control. So this bill is debating that, and it looks like there's agreement between the key proponents of the bill. It's the committee chair of the HELP committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which is Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, and the ranking Democrat, or the other major member on the Democratic side, is Senator Patty Murray from Wisconsin. And this bill moved out of committee in a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 2 or 3 months ago, in agreement that Common Core should be detached and they should make it voluntary, so that a state that wants Common Core can use it, and states that don't want to, don't have to. They can pick and choose pieces of it. That's the way the bill stands right now. And they're adding amendments to it, and there could be modifications to it. Also, it gets reconciled with a House bill at some point before the president signs. But this bill is going up for a vote on Friday, as it's been reported.
Thanks, Jake. So it sounds good to me. Ultimately, having local control over education would seem to let the individual school districts or states, as it may be appropriate for their needs. Since this is Bernie TV, I guess I got to ask the question: what the interests that put No Child Left Behind in place, are they aligned against this, or is this looking like a easy sail through Congress at this point?
Well, it looks like well, Bernie has already announced in his campaign appearances that No Child Left Behind will be gone, and this is the bill that's going to replace it. But what that means, policy by policy, detail by detail, could be different things. The big thing, the big knock on No Child Left Behind is that it's federally mandated tests every point in the campaign. She doesn't want to lock herself in, but everywhere that these candidates go, there's teachers and there's parents, and they are getting peppered with these questions. How do you feel about the Common Core? Common Core is, in Republican circles, there's a lot of support to get rid of it, and that's why it's being detached in this bill, because Senator Lamar Alexander and all of his Republican colleagues, including Mitch McConnell, they've been wanting to get rid of Common Core for a long time. Rand Paul has introduced bills to kill Common Core. Ted Cruz has signed on to bills, and a whole bunch of other Republicans. And what they're saying is, oh, this is Obama, and this is the federal government sticking their nose in our business, and this should be states' rights. And I got to say, lifelong Democrat, I agree that the federal tinkering in education has gone way too far, and that they're not listening to teachers, and they're not listening to parents anymore. They're not listening to principals, superintendents, anybody. They're just, they're endorsing let's test every kid every year, and whether or not it's going to be Common Core, we'll know when Obama signs this bill.
So Jake, let me cut in real quick.
Sure.
I see that the vote on the amendment for libraries seems to be sailing through. It's 96 or 97 yeses. Is that significant to this at this point, since that seems to be the immediate news?
Well, it's significant to Jack Reed. He is the senator that introduced the amendment, and so I'm sure he's happy that it's getting in there. I didn't hear anything major about this. I mean, who would be against being able to use federal funding for libraries in schools? So this is another little tack-on thing that's obviously not controversial. But when you get to some of these bigger issues, there's going to be at some point a vote on an amendment, and it might be today. On the Tester amendment, and that would be Senator John Tester, I believe from Montana. Hopefully I'm not screwing up my senators. But Senator Tester, who just happens to have the name Tester, has a bill that's going to say let's not test kids every single year. He's saying that it's going to be enough if we test them every 3 years, and that'll give us a general idea of how they're doing and how their schools are doing, so that we can give the support where it's needed, and it will take away 2/3 of the testing that everybody's complaining about.
So am I right in hearing that this testing is essentially to justify the federal funding and allocate it? Is that ultimately why we care how Iowa compares with New Hampshire?
Well, what you're talking about is the stick and the carrot.
Yes.
The federal funding. Your local schools are only funded, I think, 4% by the federal government, and maybe as much as 8% using different channels. And the other 90+% comes from the state and the local funding, from the state government and the local funding government, including property taxes. So, they could withhold funding, but they could also, write sanctions into the law, such as if your school doesn't perform at such and such level, then you have to have an intervention. You have to have a monitor, or you have to, it could trigger some other kind of program. But ultimately, yes, funding is the quickest way to make somebody feel the pain, or to get somebody to do what you want to do. So that's a great question. I think somebody's talking right now. If we want to listen, this might just be announcing the passage of the amendment. But what we do want to keep our ears open for is important things, and otherwise a lot of these hearings are like watching paint dry. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, the real big things, and I'm also interested to hear if Elizabeth Warren's amendment is going to get a vote today, and ultimately is going to be suggesting any amendments, because he's the man. Everybody wants to know where he stands, and he's also one of the members of this committee. Right now these are votes on the full Senate, which means every single senator gets to weigh in. But this was coming out of the ATLP committee, where Senator Sanders was a member.
Sounds good, Jake. Let me ask you a question to back up and look at the bigger picture here. So we've got a bunch of people running for president, Democrats, Republicans. In a perfect world, what would you and your Badass Teachers Association like to see happen with a new administration that would, I mean, ultimately, I think we probably all want our kids to get the best educations they can with the most supportive teachers, with the least carrot and stick. We'd like to give them carrots without having to give them sticks. What does a future look like where we're nurturing to our students and they come out as whole, capable, socially responsible people?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, and here's the point. You know, it really depends where you live and what the kids are like, what their needs are. I teach in the inner city, you know, in a school for you know, students that are struggling academically. My school was set up for kids that have been you know, left behind 2 to 3 years, you know, so they're overage, and so my students might need something completely different from the kids in the school where my wife teaches, and you know, she teaches in the suburbs of New York City, where it's some of the richest you know, zip codes, some of the richest neighborhoods in the whole state. And so her students need something very different. You know, they need a very challenging, rigorous academic program, whereas you know, the students in my school, they need basic remedial support, and they also need a lot of social emotional coaching and social emotional learning. And you know, that's just like you know, how do you concentrate in school? How do you stay connected? How do you you know, sit still? I mean, you know, it's literally, you know, issues of, you know, kids with all kinds of obstacles to learning. And you know, I believe every kid is different, every class is different, every school is different, every school district is different. And so you know, I believe that, you know, what we need to do is just, I mean, you're gonna laugh, but I agree with Michelle Bachmann, and I believe with Rick Perry, that we should, you know, abolish the Department of Education. I mean, there are some necessary things that they do in terms of civil rights. Most of those things, you know, have been smoothed out, you know, ever since the 50s and 60s, when they were, you know, preventing discrimination. To me, they're actually causing the discrimination, and to the Badass Teachers Association, I think I can speak for them to say that you know, a lot of these federal programs and a lot of these like standardized, centralized programs are hurting the kids in the inner city, because they're being forced to take tests instead of you know, closing the door and learning with their teachers. And you know, it's one of these things where federal programs just get to be so big that they take on a life of their own and they perpetuate themselves. And you know, you see these huge lobbies and these huge corporations, and they're even putting ads on TV saying, you know, we need the tests, and the tests help us identify the struggling students. And it's like, we know who the struggling students are. You know, we're in the classroom with them every day. You know, but in truth, you know, you also have census data. Census data tells you family income, and you know, you can see, you know, just from family income alone, you know, that there's a very high probability that, you know, the achievement level in those neighborhoods is going to be far lower. And of course, that's where you send in support. The thing is, we've never seen the support. You know, ever since No Child Left Behind was put in, we've just seen more and more testing, and we've never seen the support that's supposed to come once you identify the low performers. So it's been very frustrating. You know, I've only been teaching for it's going to be my 9th year, but in all that time, it's been, you know, the No Child Left Behind era, and I see kids that are really, really discouraged, deflated. They're, you know, they're really sick of school because it's become unrewarding. You know, the classes that they love have been reduced. I think I read where 17% of classes, you know, like the other classes, social studies, gym, the arts, have been reduced to make way for more test prep in math and literacy since the beginning of No Child Left Behind. I'm not sure if those figures are current until today, but when I was doing my master's work, I thought that was very interesting, because when I was a kid, I lived for art. I lived for band class, and I couldn't wait, to go and play my instrument, and then, everything else was like, you do what you got to do. Now it's the be all end all in school, and they tell kids, until you get your grades up, you can't have your elective courses. You can't have these other things. And to me that's terrible, because these are the only thing the kids are relating to in some circumstances.
Absolutely. So the more time, if I'm getting it, the more time we're spending on testing and teaching to national standards, the less time there is for what we really need to be spending time with our kids for. So, I mean, that's kind of the big picture we're looking at here.
Yeah, well, what you have is, you have the actual testing itself. The testing itself basically kills about 2 weeks of the school year. It used to be 3 days in. It used to be 2 days in math and 2 days in English, but that expanded in New York about 3 years ago to 3 days in math and 3 days in English that you're sitting there. And so, after the testing's over, those other 2 days are shot. I mean, the kids are spent, a lot of schools do field trips and things like that. So, it really cuts into the week. But from the beginning of the school year in September, when the kids come in and sit down, what's being taught, is really directed towards getting these scores up on the test.
Right.
And so it's all year long that the kids feel the tests. They feel the pressure, and and the teachers are, and we're the ones carrying it out.
Right, so we hear the phrase "teaching to the test." That's what we're talking about here.
Exactly, teaching to the test. And you might have also heard when they say narrowing curriculum, that they're narrowing the curriculum, and that's where they're concentrating more on math and English language arts than they are on the other subjects. To the point where they're cutting, social studies out completely. I've seen in New York City where they just take an English teacher and they say, okay, we're gonna instead of calling this social studies, we're gonna call it humanities, and you're not gonna get a certified social studies teacher teaching you social studies anymore. You're gonna have your English teacher, and they're just gonna kind of integrate social studies into, your English, your literacy work. And so, boom, there goes social studies. And, at no point was this ever put to a vote of school boards or state legislatures. The way the Common Core was put in, it was put in through Obama's No Child Left Behind waivers. So it was really sneaky. You could even say that No Child Left Behind, the way that we got these tests in the first place, at least it was voted on by Congress and signed into law by the president. Okay, but the Common Core, which is these standards that really changed everything, they were never voted on by anybody. They were put in because the Obama administration said to states, if you want to get your No Child Left Behind waivers, and if you want to get additional funds called Race to the Top money, you have to adopt Common Core, and you have to tie the test scores to the teacher evaluations. So, part of this was the process, and teachers, parents, it's taken years since this has been in place before they even realize that this is a policy, and it isn't until their kids get into 3rd grade, that they really, see what's happening in their own families. And that the kids come home upset and they're crying because they feel the pressure. So it really isn't until your family is affected by it that a lot of Americans hear about these policies. But the teachers are the front line. We've been living this ever since it started.
Thanks, Jake. No, it's great. It's great to hear the inside view from the teacher's profession. I've got a couple of comments here coming at us from online. One of them is that we get that you and I summarized the vote today and the relevance. But before we get to that, this may help along those lines. Someone else has said, we're talking now about H.R. 5, the Student Success Act. Is that right?
Close. That's the House version. And so the Senate and the House are taking up 2 different bills, and once they both pass, then they get reconciled. They go into reconciliation, and they say, okay, this is how they're different, and this is how they're the same. and that's like a joint process. If you want to talk about HR 5, right now Obama has threatened vetoes because there's things in the House version that he doesn't like. But those hearings are also ongoing, I think, this week as well.
Sounds good. So this comment said, the Student Success Act expresses the sense of Congress that states and local educational agencies retain the rights and responsibilities of determining educational curriculum, programs of instruction, and assessments. Is that
right? Well, that's basically
that's the same as true on the Senate side as well as the House side. That's what
right. On the House side, they're calling it the Student Success Act, I think, and you know, the House it's another Republican majority, but it's a bigger majority of Republicans than they have in the Senate. So the big complaint is that that it's unconstitutional. That Common Core is unconstitutional because it puts a you know, it doesn't put a specific curriculum on local school districts, but it does really force their hand. You have to teach so that the kids get good scores on the tests. Plus, the tests are actually supplied by the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Ed. So their argument is a constitutional argument. They're saying that according to the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights, you know, anything that's not put in the Constitution is you know, the federal government doesn't have the authority to put on us. And you know, I believe in that. I think that's a valid argument. So in the House, what they want to do is they want to you know, affirm in writing, in statute, you know, that the states are the arbiters of what's going to be taught, and you know, what the performance standards will be, and every little detail relating to education. And as I said before, you know, if I agree with Michelle Bachmann, then you know that that's, you know, something significant, because, you know, I haven't seen anything, you know, coming from the Federal Department of Education that's helped me in my job since I've been teaching. I've only seen regulations and obstacles and red tape and all of this compliance, and you know, and all these, you know, millions and billions of tax dollars just, you know, going to Pearson and going to all these companies, you know, that could be put to, you know, making class sizes smaller, or libraries, or, you know, field trips, etc.
sounds good. So I guess if you and Michelle Bachmann are agreeing, we can say there's some sort of bipartisan support on this issue.
There's bipartisan support on a lot of the elements in the House bill and the Senate bill, and that's why this is moving forward. If you want to put this in a bigger context of Washington dysfunction, you know, the fact that this is going for a vote on Friday is pretty incredible. You know, we've been in gridlock for years. You know, the Republicans have been blocking anything that Obama has done until, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, the TPP vote, right? They love that just fine. So,
yep.
You know, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, Obama, you know, they're all saying eye to eye when it comes to this trade package, which we don't have to get into. But you know, there are areas of agreement, and this seems to be one of them. Although you know, Obama has said to the Senate committee when they were negotiating this education bill that he wasn't keen on signing anything that took away accountability, which is code for, you know, annual testing. So it looks like Obama, or whoever is, you know, advising him, has him convinced that we need to have tests every single year for every student, you know, in grades 3 to 8. And you know, that's disappointing for us teachers, you know, that are actually giving the test and they're actually seeing, you know, what it's doing.
Jake, thank you. I'm going to jump in and remind everybody you're watching Bernie 2016 TV. This is a wholly volunteer-supported group of people supporting Bernie's run for the presidency, his nomination to be the next Democratic candidate. And we're running a test here to see what we can do. And if you're watching now, great. If you're watching the replay of this, please understand that we're trying to figure out how to make this work, and we're on the fly using this new technology, and we'd love to have your comments. If you go to YouTube and type in search for Bernie 2016 TV, you'll get to us. I don't know whether the engineers here can pop up a link on the screen over our faces, but that would be ideal, and maybe we'll get to that next time. Any last things you want to say, Jake, about what we'd like to see Bernie do, or what Bernie has done to help with this effort of moving education closer to something that works for real people?
Right. Well, Bernie has said some general things which are pointing in the right direction, but I think I can speak for teachers all across the country when I say we would love to know exactly where the candidates stand on high-stakes testing, on the Common Core, on teacher evaluations, also charter schools. Those are probably the biggest 3 or 4 issues. And we would love to have education forums. Teachers would love to be heard. They would love a place at the table so that we can explain what's happening, what's working and what isn't working from our perspective. Bernie, Hillary, and Martin O'Malley sat down with the AFT Teachers Union 2 weeks ago, I believe, and they gave these speeches, that were kind of general. It was kind of like platitudes. So we would love to hear specifics. We would love to hear Bernie say, "I'm for Common Core" or "I'm against Common Core," because if he comes out against Common Core, you'll see a flood of endorsements, all kinds of teacher organizations, all kinds of teacher groups. If he says that he opposes annual tests, that would be even better. And if he says that there's things about charter schools that we need to be really careful about, those are big issues. And teacher groups are waiting. Teachers are waiting for change, and so they would love to endorse candidates that are going to serve the needs of the kids. And we're waiting in this election process to hear when they're going to weigh in and get a lot more specific.
Jake, thank you very much. And let me remind people that a major plank of the Bernie Sanders platform is for universal pre-K daycare. That's certainly an important part of getting people off to a good start in the world, I think, and can help the most disadvantaged of us who couldn't afford it without public support. Right. I think that's going to wrap us up for now, unless somebody wants to jump in here and join us with questions from the group on this Hangout.
If not, I'm sure we'll be doing this again because the bill is going to be going through a couple of iterations, and then it's going to be voted on, and so we'll definitely be checking back.
Stay tuned, folks, for more from Jake on this over the coming days as this moves forward. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.